Well, we have a choice. I mean, we can pursue global hegemony, which means by violence, of course, raising the threat of extermination, maybe for ourselves as well. Or we can try to join cooperatively in a world which aims to find means of decent survival for everyone, including ourselves. Those are choices. Trying to rule the world by force is, of course, threatens the world and also threatens us. Actually, the invasion of Iraq is a good example. It was assumed in advance that the invasion of Iraq would increase the threat of terrorism. Intelligence agencies and others took that for granted. Well, it did, by about a factor of 7, pretty substantial increase. And it energizes forces that want to resist and want to destroy us. In fact, Iraq itself was virtually destroyed. Maybe they'll recover somehow. But it also, the invasion of Iraq stirred up a regional conflict between Shia and Sunni, which had simmered before, but is now an extremely dangerous conflict. The invasion of Iraq was essentially a victory for Iran, so it strengthened Iran, which has other consequences. And now the United States is fighting 2 wars in the region and maybe involved in a third. We have huge internal, the main thing is what does it do to the victims? But we're not immune. So we're supposed to be worrying about the deficit now. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, but that's a big topic. What's the deficit? About half the deficit is military spending. We have unprecedentedly high military spending. We spend about as much as the rest of the world combined, far more technologically advanced, new means of destruction being considered constantly. This morning's New York Times has a front page story on new devices for that are virtually nuclear. They're conventional, but have virtually the impact of nuclear weapons, which can be very carefully controlled by high-level surveillance to destroy any place in the world we decide to hit within an hour. These were sort of thought about during the Bush years, but kind of languished. However, Obama's revitalizing them. Now he has to make a decision as to whether to deploy them. Well, you know, if we want to threaten the world, it's going to cost us plenty, and there'll be a backlash, of course. And for the victims, it's a monstrosity. Take Iraq. One of the problems we never talk about in Iraq is displaced persons. There's about 4 million displaced persons, rough estimates, about half inside Iraq. They can't go back to their homes because of the sectarian conflict that was instigated by the invasion and became very violent and has carried out large-scale ethnic cleansing. You know, families groups that used to live together pretty happily are now bitterly antagonistic, and a long residue now of hatred and bloodshed. But there's also maybe 1.5 million and 2 million abroad, mostly in Syria, Jordan, which are poor countries that can't absorb them. Some European countries have been pretty generous, Sweden particularly and Germany, but they're cutting back. They don't want any more immigrants. They're starting to ship them out. We've done very little. What about all those people? And that happens to be Iraq's educated professional class to a large extent. I mean, the extent to which that sets back these are pretty well off before the invasion, and they were the core of the middle class, professional, advanced society. So we've just left wreckage, kind of like the Mongol invasions. Maybe they can pull something out of it. We've strengthened Iran. We're now facing off with potential conflict with Iran, which is mostly, you can question whether there's any need to do it, but we are doing it. Yeah, that's what happens if you try to rule the world by force.
what do you think the prospects are that there will be a war in Iran, either launched by us or by Israel?
It's pretty hard to predict. They're both gearing up for it. Israel's very unpredictable. It's under an ultranationalist government, which is brazenly defiant of the entire world, including the United States even by now. So, for example, one of the, there are underlying issues, but the immediate attention happens to be over construction in East Jerusalem. No country in the world accepts Israel's right to do what it's doing at East Jerusalem. Not a single one. The United States does support it, but technically we're opposed to it, though we nevertheless support it. No other country accepts it at all. In doing that, Israel's violating international law doubly. One, they're violating the general principle of international law that determines that all settlement in the occupied territories is criminal. And there's no real debate about that. Secondly, they're violating explicit Security Council resolutions on changing the character of Jerusalem, which go back to 1968. But they feel they can get away with it as long as the U.S. will support them. And right now, they're even antagonizing the U.S. What they may decide to do is extremely unpredictable when they're in that state. I don't think they can attack without U.S. authorization. They have to cross airspace that's either controlled by the U.S. or its allies. But they might. They might decide, well, we'll just do it. What are the consequences of doing that? Well, the consequences of violence are very hard to predict. Their great achievement, they think, was destroying a nuclear reactor in Iraq in 1981. Little footnote to that. That was that's been carefully investigated by specialists in nuclear engineering, even U.S. intelligence. And the general conclusion is that that bombing did not stop Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons program. It initiated it. It was a reactor designed for nuclear power. After it was attacked and destroyed, Saddam instantly turned to trying to develop nuclear weapons. Okay, that's might have done it. Well, that's one consequence of violence, to increase proliferation and threat to yourself. What would happen this time? Unpredictable. I mean, Iran can cause plenty of problems for Iran is surrounded by hostile armies. U.S. forces on both of its borders, two of its borders. It can cause. It has plenty of influence in Afghanistan and Iraq. It can use it to seriously harm even U.S. forces there. It can maybe close off the Gulf of Hormuz, which would block oil shipment. And it may just, as in the case of Iraq, just intensify their nuclear weapons programs. In fact, it would be amazing, as if we don't know whether they're trying to develop nuclear weapons or not. I mean, U.S. official, the Pentagon just came out with an unclassified analysis of what they call the Iran threat. They define the Iran threat as one of deterrence. They say Iran they point out that Iran spends very little on the military, lower by regional standards than other countries, an infinitesimal fraction of what we do. And they are developing, according to the Pentagon, a deterrent capacity. They want to protect themselves from being attacked and destroyed. The Pentagon also says that they destabilize the region. Destabilize just means they interfere with we don't destabilize the region when we invade countries and destroy them. That's stabilization. That's the way the word is used. But they're destabilizing it. That is, they're putting up barriers to our control of other countries by violence and so on, which is probably true. But it's essentially a defensive position. Well, if you bomb them, it might stop being that. They might decide that the only way they can survive is by having an offensive military capacity, nuclear capacity, the way other countries that surround them do. I mean, not only do they have American forces on both of their borders, but there are 3 states that have not signed the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, unlike Iran, which has, Israel, India, and Pakistan. Right around them, all U.S. allies, all developing nuclear weapons with U.S. support. I mean, you know, we don't consider that a problem for them, but if there's anything remotely comparable to that in our case, we'd be building doomsday machines, you know, and probably using, and yeah, it might spur them on to that. These are, and of course, the consequences of the reason why survival comes into play is that there really are issues of species survival, basically 2. One is nuclear war, which is always possible. 2 U.S. allies, India and Pakistan, are, with U.S. support, building up nuclear weapon systems. They've been at war several times, come very close to the use of nuclear weapons. The issues remain. It could happen again. Israel is straining at the leash, you know, to try to engage in further violence, and could turn nuclear. And all of this leads to proliferation, extensive proliferation. In fact, in many other ways. So one of the ways to reduce proliferation, if Obama were serious about it, is to establish nuclear weapons-free zones. Okay, that doesn't end the problem of proliferation, but it reduces it. Well, the African Union just did establish a nuclear weapons-free zone, but Obama won't permit it because it includes an island, the island of Diego Garcia, which the U.S. uses as a base for storing nuclear weapons. So it will not permit the African Union treaty to be implemented. And that base is not abstract. That's the base that the U.S. uses for its bombing missions and support for naval activities in the Middle East and Central Asia. In fact, right now, last couple of months, Obama has sent a new submarine tender to Diego Garcia to service nuclear submarines that are there. The nuclear submarines means, first of all, undetectable, but also they carry missiles with nuclear warheads. And just more recently is sent what are called bunker busters. These are the biggest weapons in the U.S. arsenal. They're, I think, 13 tons. They're supposed to go through thousands of tons of reinforced concrete. They're aimed at Iran, and everybody knows it. They're just, you know, they're the biggest weapons so far short of nuclear weapons. He's just been sending them to Diego Garcia. Well, these 2 were initiated in the Bush administration, but the Bush administration didn't develop them. As soon as Obama came in, he accelerated their production and deployment, according to the Pentagon, by several years. They're now being deployed on Diego Garcia. Well, you know, these are all serious threats of war, which raise the possibility of nuclear war, which could be so devastating there's no talking about it. And looming not very far in the background, a serious environmental crisis. All of this contributes to it in 2 ways. For one thing, just by making it worse. Like the Pentagon is a huge polluter, and war, of course, we don't have to talk about. But also by delaying action. And the longer we delay action, the worse it's going to be. So there really are issues of survival. Or the alternative is hegemony. We'll just rule the world, what your friends are saying. Why shouldn't we? You know?